The heart monitor flat-lined for 3 seconds before anyone moved. Then the lieutenant colonel grabbed the crash cart and hurled it into the hallway, and every nurse on the ward heard the metal scream against the linoleum floor. Sergeant Major Eldon Briggs, retired, 61 years old, and currently the most feared patient on Ward 4B of Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center, had been awake for 36 hours and was running a fever of 104.1. The infection eating through the bone in his left tibia did not care that he had served 28 years with the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. It did not care that he had survived 2 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Bosnia. It was going to kill him in this fluorescent-lit room in Toronto unless someone got a central line into his chest in the next few hours, and Eldon Briggs was not going to let that happen without a fight. Nurse Janet Osi-Mensah had arrived at the ward desk at 06:45 to find her colleague Trevor slumped against the back wall of the nursing station with a coffee cup in each hand, and the look of a man who had genuinely considered resigning twice in the past hour. "He's in 412, Trevor said, before she could even set down her bag. "He's been there since Monday. The ortho team is refusing to go back in. He threw a urine sample at Dr. Pfeiffer yesterday. A full one, a full one." Janet hung her coat on the hook behind the station. She was 32 years old, had dark, close-cropped hair, and wore no jewelry except for a small stud in her left ear. Her scrubs were the faded navy blue of someone who washed them often and ironed them never. She reached across the desk and picked up the chart for room 412. She did not read the medication orders first. She did not look at the labs. She went directly to the service history section, the way she always did when the chart was flagged difficult. And she read it the way someone reads a letter they have been waiting years to open, carefully with their whole body. She found what she was looking for 3/4 of the way down the page. 2nd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, Kandahar Province, 2008-2009. Panjwai District. Janet closed the chart. She pressed 2 fingers against the bridge of her nose and stood like that for a moment. "Janet," Trevor was watching her, "you don't have to draw up the cefazolin," she said. "And a flush. I'll take him." She could hear him before she reached the door. "Told the last one to get out, and I'm telling you the same thing. I don't want anyone from this ward coming in here. I want someone with an actual medical degree, not a glorified pill counter who learned nursing from a YouTube tutorial." He was speaking to no one. The room was empty except for him. He'd been rehearsing. Janet pushed the door open without knocking. Eldon Briggs was sitting upright in his hospital bed, which he had somehow managed to angle toward the door, as if he had been expecting someone to come through it and wanted to be ready. He was a big man, broad across the shoulders in a way that illness had not entirely diminished, with a gray buzz cut and the kind of hands that had spent decades doing hard physical work. His left leg was elevated, the dressing on his tibia visible through the gap in his hospital gown. His color was bad. His eyes, which were dark brown and deeply unhappy, fixed on Janet the moment she stepped through the door. "I said, get someone else," he said. "Good morning, Sergeant Major," Janet said. She stepped over a plastic water jug that had been knocked off its tray and was rolling slowly toward the baseboard. "My name is Janet. I'll be taking over your care this morning. Can you tell me your pain level on a scale of 1 to 10? "My pain level is get out. That's not a number." "You want a number?" He leaned forward. The movement clearly cost him. She saw the flicker of it cross his face before he suppressed it. 0. I feel nothing. I don't need your medication. I don't need a central line. I don't need any of this. What I need is for someone in this building to tell me what is actually happening with my leg instead of sending children to babysit me. Your leg has a bone infection, Janet said. She set the medication tray on the bedside table with a clean, unhurried motion. It has spread into the periosteum. If we don't get the antibiotic directly into your bloodstream in the next few hours, we are looking at septicemia. You know what that is. Don't lecture me. I'm not lecturing you. I'm telling you the clinical facts. She pulled on a pair of gloves. Give me your right arm. He looked at her for a long moment. She looked back. She did not look away, and she did not fidget, and she did not fill the silence with reassurance, which was what most people did, which was exactly what he wanted her to do. Where did you train? He asked finally. University of Ottawa. Then CHIO for 2 years, then here. She picked up the tourniquet. You ever worked with military patients? Some. Then you know what it's like to be treated like a child. You know what it's like to go from commanding a section of infantry in a war zone to sitting in a bed while someone half your age pats your arm and tells you to breathe deeply. I do know what that's like, Janet said. Something in her tone made him stop. She had said it quietly, with no particular emphasis. But there was something underneath the words that was not clinical, something that had weight to it. He studied her face. She was already reaching for his arm, her movements precise and practiced. You're not listening to me, he said, but the edge had gone slightly dull. I heard everything you said. I'm still going to put this line in. She swabbed the crook of his elbow. You can make it harder or you can make it easier. Either way, it's going in. He pulled his arm back, not violently, deliberately. Get out, he said. His voice had dropped into a register that Janet recognized. The low, controlled register of a man who had spent years giving orders that were never questioned, and who was now watching that authority dissolve inside a set of hospital walls, and did not know what to do with the fury that was left. Get someone else, a male nurse, a doctor, someone who's actually earned the right to stand in this room. You civilian nurses, you think a long shift is hard? You don't know what hard is. You don't know what it means to make a decision that gets people killed. You don't know anything. Janet stood very still. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way she had learned to look at people in places where you had to make fast decisions with bad information. She saw the fever in his eyes, the slight lag in his tracking, the way his hands were gripping the bed rail, not with aggression, but with the effort of staying upright. She saw a man who was not arguing with her. He was arguing with something much older and much heavier than her. She set the tourniquet down on the tray. I'll come back, she said. You have some time, not much, but some. She walked out. In the hallway, she stopped beside the linen cart and pressed her palms flat against the wall. The corridor smelled of floor cleaner and reheated food from the breakfast trolley that was making its rounds at the far end of the ward. Someone down the hall was watching a morning news program at low volume. She breathed in, breathed out, the Panjwai district, 2008 to 2009. She had been 23 years old. She had been a combat medical technician with the Canadian Forces, attached to a forward operating base 20 kilometers from Kandahar city. She had spent 8 months eating dust and heat and the particular silence that comes before an explosion, and she had come home in November of 2009 carrying things she did not have words for, which was why she had eventually stopped trying to find words and had gone to nursing school instead. She knew exactly what the second PPCLI had done in Panjwai that year. She knew what the casualty numbers were. She knew what the terrain was like, and what the threat environment was, and what it meant to be responsible for men in that district in that year. Because she had been there, not with his battalion, with a different unit, a different base, but the same dust, the same sky, the same weight. She pushed off the wall and went back to the nurse's station. "Trevor," she said, "do me a favor and pull the full service record if we have it, not just the summary, the whole thing." When she returned to room 412 at 10:30, the situation had worsened in the way she had known it would. Briggs was febrile and visibly struggling. He was still upright, still holding himself, as though conceding to the pillow would constitute a formal surrender. But the sweat on his forehead was heavier now, and his breathing had the shallow, slightly too fast quality she did not like. He turned to look at her when she came in. "I told you to send someone else." "I know." Janet moved the chair to the side of his bed and sat down. She did not go for the medication tray. She folded her hands in her lap. "I want to ask you something first." He blinked. That was not what he had been expecting. "Your temperature is 39.4 and climbing," she said. "You're going to crash in the next few hours if we don't get ahead of this. You know that. So I'm not going to argue with you about the line again right now." She looked at him steadily. "What happened in Panjwai?" The silence in the room became a different kind of silence. Briggs stared at her, his jaw tightened. "That is none of your business," he said, very quietly. "Maybe not," Janet said, "but you're not angry at me, Sergeant Major, and you're not angry at this hospital. You've been angry since before you got here, and whatever is underneath that is making it harder for you to let anyone help you. And I need you to be able to let me help you, or you are going to die in this bed, and I am not willing to let that happen. You have no idea." "Corporal Shane Dufour," Janet said. Briggs stopped breathing. The name hung in the air of the small room like something physical. "Private First Class Amir Zadran," Janet continued. Her voice was even. It did not waver. "Master Corporal Kevin Toth." Briggs's hands had gone white on the bed rail. "How do you know those names?" he said. It was not a question. It had no inflection at all. It was the voice of a man who had just been handed something he had spent years keeping out of reach. Janet reached up to the collar of her scrubs. She unclipped her hospital ID badge and set it on the bedside table. Then she reached for her left sleeve and pushed it up past her elbow. On the inside of her left forearm, in ink that had faded to the gray-blue of old denim from years of sun and time, was a tattoo. It was not decorative. It was the kind of tattoo that means something specific to a specific group of people. A caduceus, the medical symbol, but rendered in a military style, angular, unadorned. Beneath it, in plain block letters, CF Med Tech, and below that, smaller but unmistakable, Fob Wilson, Panjwai, 2008-09. Briggs looked at the tattoo for a long time. "You were at Wilson," he said. "I was at Wilson. You were there the whole rotation." "March to November," he exhaled. It was not quite a breath and not quite a word. Something in between. "Then you know what Root Foster's was like," he said. "I know what it was like." "Then you know that when I made the call on October 14th, I had clean intelligence. I had eyes on that road for 6 hours before I sent them down it. I know that too." "Then you know," his voice broke cleanly and completely, like a branch in cold weather. He pressed his mouth together. His eyes were bright with fever and something older than fever. "Then you know what it is to watch something you authorized turn into a disaster in 20 seconds. To know that 3 men are dead because of a decision that came from you. Janet did not look away from him. I know what it is to carry that, she said quietly. Yes. Briggs put his hand over his face. His shoulders shook once, twice, and then he controlled it, the way men of his generation and background and training controlled everything, by force of will, mostly, and at considerable cost. Shane Dufour was 24 years old, he said, his voice muffled behind his hand. He had a daughter, 8 months old. He showed me a photograph of her the morning of the patrol. She was wearing a little red hat. He lowered his hand. His eyes were wet. I ordered him down that road. I reviewed the intelligence myself. I cleared the route, and a pressure plate killed him and Amir and Kevin in 15 seconds. And there was nothing I could have done because the intelligence was right. The threat assessment was right, and they still died. The intelligence was right, Janet said. He looked at her sharply. You know what was found at the end of that road, she said. It was not a question. I know what was in the after-action report, he said. A small weapons cache. Nothing significant. That's not the full picture, Janet said. Something in her voice made him go very still. She leaned forward slightly. What was in the after-action report was what was cleared for release at the time. I know this because I was the med tech who arrived on scene on October 14th after the blast. I was the one who triaged Dufour and Zadran and Toth in that road. Her voice had gone low and steady, the voice of someone reporting from inside a memory that is still very close. And while I was working on them, the section that reached the end of the route found what was being stored in a compound at the terminus of that road. Briggs did not move. It was a staging area, Janet said, 2 vehicles loaded with explosives, command wire detonators. The compound was being used as a forward logistics point for an attack on the main gate of Phobe Spurwan Gar. The timeline on the planning documents recovered there put the attack within 48 hours. I never read that in any report, Briggs said. It was classified at the theater level, Janet said. I only found out myself 3 years later, when a friend who stayed in the forces longer than I did told me what had been in the full intelligence summary that was never distributed below the lieutenant colonel level. She looked at him directly. Dufour and Zadran and Toth did not die because you sent them down a dangerous road, Sergeant Major. They died because they found that compound and they engaged the personnel guarding it, and the detonation of the defensive charge they triggered is what brought down the blast that killed them. They went down that road and they found the thing that would have killed 80 people. And they stopped it. The silence in the room was so complete that Janet could hear the ventilation system in the ceiling. Briggs's face was absolutely still. He was a man who had learned to keep his face still under extreme circumstances. And he was using every bit of that training right now because he was looking at a truth that was 14 years old and enormous, and he did not know where to put it. You're not just saying that, he said finally. His voice was a scrape of sound. I am not just saying that. Why did nobody? He stopped, started again. Why did nobody tell me? Because the intelligence chain above you decided that operational security around the compounds in that district outweighed your need to know, Janet said. Which was a decision that was wrong, and I'm sorry nobody corrected it sooner. She held his gaze. But I'm correcting it now. Those men were not victims of a bad decision. They were soldiers who encountered an active threat, and they engaged it, and they stopped something catastrophic. That is what actually happened on October 14th. Briggs turned his head away from her. He looked at the window. Outside the glass, Toronto in November was low and gray, the sky the color of old concrete. A single bare tree was visible against the white of the building opposite. When he turned back, his face had changed. Not dramatically, not the way faces change in films, but something had shifted behind his eyes. Some tectonic weight that had been sitting in one position for a very long time had moved, just slightly, just enough to let a different kind of light in. He did not speak for almost a full minute. Then he lifted his right arm and extended it toward her. "Put the line in," he said. His voice was rough and exhausted, and something else that did not have a clean name. "Please." Janet worked quickly and without ceremony. She prepped the insertion site, laid out the sterile field, and talked him through it in the low, matter-of-fact way she had learned in a forward operating base in Kandahar. Not soothing, not bright, just honest and direct and calm. He held still with a discipline that would have impressed her if she had not expected it. When the cefazolin began moving through the line, she stepped back and stripped her gloves and disposed of the sharps, and then she did something she rarely did in a patient room. She sat back down. They did not talk much for the next while. They did not need to. There is a particular kind of silence that exists between people who have been in the same places during the same difficult years. And it is not an uncomfortable silence. It is the silence of people who understand each other's shorthand. Eventually, Briggs said, "What made you leave?" "My father got sick," Janet said. 2010. I came home on compassionate leave and I looked at him in the hospital bed and I thought about what the nurses were doing, and I thought, I could do that. So I did. You didn't go back? I thought about it. Then I decided that there were a lot of different ways to be useful, and some of them didn't require a rifle. She paused. Do you have family here? A son. He's in Ottawa. He knows I'm here. He and I are not. Briggs stopped. We disagree about some things. You should call him. He doesn't want to hear from me. You don't know that for certain, Janet said. People's positions on things can change. Sometimes when you give them information they didn't have. He looked at her. That was not subtle, he said. I wasn't trying to be subtle, she said. I was trying to make a point. The edge of something, almost like a smile, crossed his face. It was brief and complicated and old. You're a pain in the ass, Janet. I've been told that, she said. Briggs improved steadily over the following 10 days in the way that patients improve when they finally stop fighting the treatment. The fever broke inside the first 36 hours. His white blood cell count dropped, then continued dropping. The orthopedic team came back. Cautiously, like people returning to a campsite where they'd previously encountered a bear, and found him cooperative, which one of the residents described to Janet as genuinely disorienting. He was direct with the doctors now in a way that was still demanding but no longer hostile. He asked specific questions and expected specific answers, and pushed back when the answers were vague, which Janet had explained to Dr. Pfeiffer was not obstructionism, but simply the way he had operated for 3 decades, and it was faster to answer him thoroughly than to deflect. She checked his vitals every morning first. He was always already awake when she came in, sitting upright, sometimes reading, once with a crossword puzzle that he was completing in pen. Your son called, he told her one morning, which confused her until she realized he meant a patient 2 doors down who she had mentioned in passing. He had been listening to things she said, cataloging them. She recognized the habit. On the 8th day, a tall young man in his early 30s appeared in the doorway of room 412. He had his father's jaw and his father's posture and his father's particular way of standing in a doorway, as though assessing the room before committing to entering it. Janet was checking the line when he appeared. She looked at Briggs. Briggs was looking at his sons with an expression that was not quite neutral and not quite open. Something transitional. Something that wanted to be more than it currently knew how to be. "I'll check back at noon," Janet said, and she wheeled the cart out and pulled the door almost closed behind her. She stood in the hallway for a moment and listened to the sound of two people beginning cautiously and imperfectly to talk. On a Friday morning in the third week of November, Janet was called to the lobby by the charge nurse on her way out of her shift. "There's something downstairs," was all the charge nurse would say. The lobby of Sunnybrook was large and busy in the mornings. Volunteers at the information desk, families coming in for visiting hours, porters moving patients between units. When Janet came through the stairwell door and rounded the corner into the main atrium, she stopped. Eldon Briggs was standing near the entrance, dressed in dark civilian clothes, leaning on a single cane, his discharge papers folded in his jacket pocket. He had regained some weight in the face, and his color was good. He was holding himself with the careful, deliberate uprightness of a man who has recently been very ill, and is not yet entirely recovered, and would prefer that no one notice. Beside him were 7 people. Some were in their 40s, some were older. A woman with a prosthetic arm, a man with a hearing aid and a deep scar along his jawline, 2 men in the motorcycle cuts of a veterans riding group, patches on the leather that Janet could read from 20 feet away, the maple leaf, unit numbers, the thistle and crown of the PPCLI. One of them was leaning on a cane, one of them was not. They were all standing very still, with their weight distributed in the particular way that people stand when they have been trained to stand at attention and are trying to do a civilian version of it. Janet recognized 2 of them. A medic she had worked alongside at F.O. Wilson for 3 months in the summer of 2008. A signals corporal who had been brought into her triage station with a head wound in September of the same year, and had left under his own power 2 weeks later. She recognized the rest of them from something less specific, the way they held themselves, the way they were watching her, the quality of their attention. She had spent 8 months with people who looked at the world like that. She knew the look. Briggs took 1 step forward on his cane. "We had a conversation," he said, "about what it means to be useful in a lot of different ways." His voice was steady and controlled, the way voices are controlled when the person using them is doing something that costs them. "I've been repeating that conversation to people. Word seems to have gotten around." Janet looked at the 7 faces behind him. "We wanted to say thank you," said the woman with the prosthetic arm. Her voice was low and direct. "Not just for Eldon, for what you did at Wilson. A lot of us were through that base at one point or another. Some of us came through your hands. Some of us came through the hands of people you trained," said the man with the scar along his jaw. Janet felt something move through her that she did not have a word for. She had not cried in a hospital at work since her 2nd year of nursing school, and she was not going to start now, but it was a near thing. Briggs reached into his jacket pocket. He produced a small object and held it out to her. It was a challenge coin, not a new one. The edges were worn, and the face was polished smooth in the center from years of handling. On one side, the PPCLI regimental crest. On the other, 2 crossed caduceus, and the words that she had not read in a long time. "Duty first." "That belonged to Corporal Dufour," Briggs said. His voice was very even. His mother sent it to me when she found out I'd been his commanding officer. She wanted me to have it so that I'd remember him." He paused. "I'm giving it to you so that you'll know why he died, and so that what you did for him on that road is never," he stopped, cleared his throat, "is never not known by the person who deserves to know it." Janet took the coin. It was warm, from his pocket. She closed her hand around it. The man with the scar on his jaw said something quietly to the man beside him, and then he straightened up and put his heels together. "Attention," he said, not loudly, but clearly. The people behind Briggs came to attention. The lobby sounds, the murmur of conversations, the squeak of wheels on linoleum, the chime of an elevator, all seemed to recede into the background the way sounds recede when something more important is happening in the foreground. Briggs straightened on his cane until he was as upright as he was going to get. 7 right hands rose in salute. Then Briggs's hand rose as well, slower, the cane taking his weight, but steady. Janet raised her hand and returned it. She stood in the lobby of a hospital in Toronto on a November morning, and she felt, for the first time in a long time, that she had been seen entirely. Not the nurse, not the civilian, not the woman who had left the forces and spent a decade building a different kind of life, but the person who had been on that road, who had put her hands on those men and done what she could, and carried it home, and carried it still. There are things that happen in the worst places that cannot be explained afterward to people who were not there. There are bonds that form in those places that have no civilian equivalent. But sometimes, if you are very fortunate, the people who shared those places with you find their way back into the same room. That is what happened on a November morning in the lobby of Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center in Toronto, Canada. And if you have ever worn a uniform or loved someone who did, then you already know exactly what that moment felt like for all of them. If this story moved you, please share it to honor the men and women who serve, and subscribe to The Real Nurse for more stories of courage, sacrifice, and the people who hold us all together.